You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by FreightPlus. I'm your host, Kyle McNaught. Thanks for checking us out. Today is another great episode because we get to do SCU30, the Supply Chain Under 30, a fun series that we have in consulting logistics where we talk to some of the up-and-coming engineers, analysts, masters, people with their masters in supply chain. But we talk to all these up-and-coming, the young generation, about their interactions with the supply chain and what really drove them to the supply chain. And today's episode is one that I'm so excited for because I know he's a massive fan of this show. So I'm just so excited to bring him on. Today we're going to talk to Frank Lee. He is the data analyst at FreightPlus. So it's a great group. He joined us in the middle of a pandemic, so it's going to be fun to talk about that. And my God, guys, are you going to be excited to hear about his background? It is fascinating of who we have joining the FreightPlus team. So in today's conversation, we're going to talk a little bit about Frank's background because it's really, really interesting, the supply chain experience he had prior to joining us, and then what his role at FreightPlus really, really is. So I'm going to quit talking. I'm going to bring in the man himself. Frank, how's it going?
What's up, Kyle? Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. I know you listen to it all the time. You actually tell
Oh,
me
yeah.
when I did good. So you're one of the ones I'm like, oh, this is awesome. If Frank really liked it, I did a good job on this episode.
Yeah, it's an honor for me to finally be on here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it's been all my fault for not getting you on sooner. I know we've been just so busy and stuff like that, but I'm so excited to finally have you on, Frank, because your background is fascinating. I mean, it's something that's super, super interesting. So let's jump right into it. Talk a little bit about kind of what your childhood was like. How was it growing up? I mean, there's a little surprise people are gonna get to hear right off the bat.
Sure, of course. So I grew up in China. I'm from China. Spent my first 18 years there before going to Rice University down in Houston, Texas for college. Um, I my parents wanted me to kind of come to the States for college because they thought the United States had the best kind of higher education in the world. And yeah, based on my 4-year experience, I definitely enjoyed my time at Rice University. And I double majored in computer science and sport management just because I have a huge, strong passion for sports. And also, I think computer science is a handy or practical skills that it's very valuable nowadays and that can be applied to different fields.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I go back and kick myself for A, not doing more business stuff in college, and B, not doing more computer stuff. I mean, it's all stuff you pick up on the thing, but I'm like, damn, I wish I should have done that before. But before we even get into the college, let's talk a little bit about growing up in China. Just, I mean, listen, I grew up in Florida, right? So I grew up in a whole different world from a lot of people. But what was childhood like? Did you have technology? Did you have a cell phone? Did you have a computer where you kind of just was technology day one for you?
It's definitely not technology day one for me. So I'm the only child in of my parents, so no siblings. And my dad was used to be pretty strict with me, and he wanted me to learn a lot of stuff like piano, and we also played basketball together. He wanted me to play a lot of sports growing up because thinks it's good for my health, and I can learn a lot of stuff from sports. So that's kind of also how I fell in love with sports industry itself. But as far as technology wise, I haven't I never saw myself as like a genius in like STEM fields or math or science. I'm decent at it back in like elementary school or middle school, but I'm like when it comes to doing these like super hard like competitions in math competitions contests, I'm not the one who always gets like the first prize, like the first position or second position. So I mean, I have a good interest in math, and I know it helped solve a lot of problems. But honestly, from for me back then, I was thinking more about more kind of social science maybe because I find myself very interested in like politics or like social issues, and I kind of enjoy talking with people and to see how to kind of exchange ideas and see from the like different perspective, and that really fascinates me. But since And like after going to college, I had a very long conversation with my parents, especially with my mom, to about what like major I should major in, like what I should do for a career. And they highly suggest to do something like STEM related, just because again it's really applicable to nearly every industry. So I think, well, since I have a like decent background, I would say, and this doesn't I didn't realize how difficult it would get at that point. So I said, sure, I will do it. I will do the computer science major, and that was in my freshman year. So the next 3 years it was a grind for sure. As I mean, many computer science majors can confirm, but it's definitely worth it, I would say.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, listen, kudos to your mom because my mom said you really like the movie Anchorman. Maybe you should do something in communications. Was like the way I got kicked in the world. So
Mhm.
that's huge. But yeah, it's fascinating to see that like it really wasn't a big passion. It wasn't like you're not one of those like you hear it all the time, right? I was coding when I was like 8 and I was creating my own things. Like you hear that when it comes to computer science, and you almost feel like, oh geez, I'm like well behind. Like just because I do a little developing right now and I can work a little bit in like HTML, you feel like, oh man, I no matter what, I'm screwed because I didn't do this as a child. But it's fascinating, and kind of we're gonna start transitioning into what you did after kind of Rice and stuff, but it's so interesting. I mean, I've been hearing that more and more of kind of the people in the data world are more people person than you would really expect. Like everyone thinks of them as a very like linear. I work with a machine. That's it. But it's so fascinating. Uh, so what was it like? How was it like? How did you stick with it? I mean, the amount of people I know that were immediately willing to drop out of like a hard major. How like what fascinated you about computer science and kind of with that type of stuff?
Sure. I definitely like the thought of giving up and dropping out definitely like crossed through my mind a couple times, but I stick with it because I think one reason is I've like the more I'm into it, the more that I found how useful and powerful it can be to problem solving. I think I need to kind of give credit to like Rice Computer Science program. Um, they kind of do a good job that showcasing how computer science really kind of reshapes the way like people think, because the first class that I took for a computer science major is not about like coding itself. It's called computational thinking. So it basically changes the way you think about how you approach different problems or different tasks. So that is really helpful to me. And besides that, as like the more I code, then the more sort of difficulties I face, like for example, like debugging and not able to solve a problem for like the algorithm questions. Like the more I have to like reach out for help, and through that I had a built a like solid relationship with other peers, other folks who are also fellow computer science majors, and also with professors, because everyone is just helping out with each other. And I think the community itself is pretty cool, and the feeling of cracking, like the feeling of not able to solve the problem for like 3 days straight, but at a click after in the shower, like you have a solution. It's amazing. So that is something, that experience, I don't want to say that I want to have like that 3 day, like 3 day difficulty a lot, but I definitely enjoy that click moment for sure.
Oh yeah, man. I get the same thing. Literally with the creative, like I had an aha moment in the shower today. Like it's one of those like you kind of think about it, but it's so interesting that like you would think data science, communications, marketing guy, like we don't have like the same thought process, but it's very fascinating how we kind of get there. And not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like the upbringing with the whole practice and like doing so much stuff, you kind of understood, like you saw it was hard, but you also got the idea of like, hey, it's just reps. I just need to get work at this stuff. The more I do it, the better I'm going to be at it, the faster I'll be in on that type of stuff. I mean, it sounds like while you weren't coding at the age of 8, you were doing practices that really helped you out.
Yeah, for sure. And in fact, two of the most said sentences by my dad is, one of them is, practice makes perfect. and the second one is no pain, no gain. So that's kind of that's kind of the principles I live with. So yeah, it's definitely not fun to work through the grind, to work like all the hard work, but I have a strong faith that it will pay off someday. So
Yeah, I mean, the reward's worth it. At the end of the day,
yeah,
you get to see that. Now, Rice wasn't only good in the sense that they really helped you kind of get data science, they kind of set you up with a really cool path that your career took. Let's talk a little bit about that and kind of what data analytics you brought to the game of basketball, which is fascinating. I mean, I know like just a very brief thing of it, but talk to me a little bit about how basketball analytics kind of became your kind of path and your journey when it comes to your career.
sure. So fell in love with basketball through the NBA and through watching Yao Ming play. And I mean, obviously he's big in China. Yes, both. Yeah, he's probably the most popular person, one of the most popular person I would say in China
It's like
when he was playing.
it was him and Kobe, right? Were they like
Yeah,
the one two? Yeah, man.
it's him, and number two is Kobe,
Who
and number three is like
who's your number
whoever.
one? Who was your number one fan player?
It's not Yao Ming, unfortunately.
Who is it?
I'm a Tim Duncan fan. I'm a Spurs fan.
Duncan. Oh, come
Yeah.
on. The most vanilla plain basketball player. You were watching basketball when AI was around. How did you not love Allen Iverson?
Hey, I'm the kind of person who believes that a 2 points is 2 points. Like no matter how flashy it is, it's still 2 points. And the only thing I care about is winning games. It's about championships. So that's why I fell in love with the Spurs and Tim Duncan.
See, I was a T-Mac fan. Tracy McGrady was my boy because I was in Orlando, right? So I got to see him, and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. But yeah, I love T-Mac, a little Scotty. I mean, Penny Hardaway was awesome. I was a sort of a Magic fan and then Celtics fan. So Paul Pierce is always my boy up here. But
Yeah.
so sorry, go ahead. Sorry to derail us with that. But yeah, so you grew up loving basketball, like, and then it was just sort of like you kind of were like, oh wait, there's a connection here. Like I'm doing some stuff that actually can work.
Yeah. Since Yao Ming was at the Rockets, the general manager of the Rockets, Daryl Morey, kind of came into the site that I kind of paid more attention to what the general manager does, and I found out his like Daryl Morey's background as a computer science major from MIT, and I thought that was pretty cool because most of kind of the front office people in the NBA teams have somewhat basketball like playing basketball background, but Daryl Morey comes from a pure kind of programming or computer science background. So, but he's also doing a great job in that. So that was pretty interesting to me because that also gave me a hope of maybe I can be a general manager someday. So maybe I should just follow his path. So that is kind of when basketball analytics first came into my mind. So I just kind of started to pay more attention to, first off, it's like box scores, and then it's kind of more advanced metrics, what it really means, how it evaluates players, or the effectiveness of all of that. So yeah, I think basketball analytics is a perfect combination for me because I can combine my passion for the game of basketball with kind of my skills in computer science or programming to solve the problems in the field that I'm interested in the most.
Yeah, man, that's fascinating. So, where did you go from there? Like, you kind of saw the dots starting to align. What was your kind of first step? How did you kind of? Because I mean, the spoiler alert. At the end of this, like you were you were the head. Let me make sure I get this right. But you were head of research and development for basketball analytics at Memphis, which Memphis ain't no shabby program. How did you connected the dots? But how did you get your foot in the door? How did you get started?
Yeah. So that was University of Memphis instead of like Memphis Grizzlies, the NBA team. So that
Yeah, my
was
bad. Sorry, I'm Florida State fan, Coach Norvell. Like I know Memphis. Like I just like, oh, everyone knows Memphis,
yeah,
but I forgot. You're right. Yeah, University of Memphis. Continue.
yeah, coached by Penny Hardaway.
There we go.
Yeah. So at Rice, I was involved in a student-run kind of organization called Department of Statistics and Analytics, which works closely with our basketball team, both men's and women's, to provide analytical stats supports for them. For example, like scouting report and doing some long-term project, like who's the best 2-man combo or 3-man combo from Rice. So these kind of projects are really helpful for coaches, and coaches, as we have an end of season meeting after every season, and coaches basically were begging us to kind of continue to do more work for them. So that was pretty helpful, just because I get to learn the game of basketball through a different way, just through talking to coaching staff, just watching practices, how coaches, how like these players train or how these players practice, what kind of drills, and how just also think about how we can measure how they perform in practice and how it translates into what they're actually performing on court when facing other opponents. So this is kind of the first real experience I had in basketball analytics. And after graduation, through a mutual friend of me and Christian Wright, who is also the data engineer at FreightPlus, our mutual friend kind of connected us. Firstly, because we both have interest in basketball, and Christian was working at University of Memphis for the analytics team, and he basically asked me if I'm interested in joining them because he saw kind of my past experience, and he thought what I've done at Rice is pretty similar with what they're doing at University of Memphis. So I said, yeah, sure. And so now I'm working with a group of really intelligent individuals who are passionate about basketball analytics. And we are trying to build the most advanced, the best analytics program all across NCAA basketball. So
Yeah, that part's fascinating. I mean, you think, and I think it's one of those things that a lot of people have a hard time, and they know Moneyball, right? Like that's the big thing. They know Moneyball, but the data insights that you can provide in basketball, it's fascinating. I mean, again, I hate when I use the word fascinating. Again, I probably should make a 2021 like thing where every time I do that, I pay you $1. You can tell me because you listen, but the insights that you would get from that, and like you say, how the coaches use it. I mean, how was that for you? What was that like? How were you able to connect the dots? Because that seems like it's a hard thing for a lot of people to understand, especially when it comes to what insights you can get from data. How did you help me learn kind of how basketball coaches and GMs and stuff are utilizing data?
Sure. And I think Daryl Morey had a quote that I think is really fascinating or interesting. He said, the game of basketball is a perfect combination of science and art. So that means there definitely is a place for all the analytics work, but the game of basketball should not be completely dependent on what numbers say, because we have to put numbers into the context. For example, if I tell you, say, Tracy McGrady, for example, scored 50 points, but we will think, wow, that's awesome, he had a great game. But what if I told you he took 70 shots, for example, and he made like 20 of them, his field goal percentage is below 30%. So would you also think that is a great game? So context always matters in like kind of analytics. So from a analyst perspective, what we can help coaches and GMs is to provide as much useful information to them without providing a kind of false picture, without like any bias. So that is what I'm striving to do. That one thing is like coaches and GM will reach out to us to say, hey, this is what I want to see. Could you do a project on that? But on the other hand, we want to proactively provide any insights we found that could be helpful for them for game planning, for example, or decision making. And one small example would be, say if you're down 3 points at the end of the game, and when the game is on the line, we have say 20 seconds left on the game clock. Should you take a quick two, or should you shoot for a three? Should you shoot a three pointers to tie the game, or should you go for a quick two and then foul them and foul the opponent? Because when you get to quick 2 points, you're still down by one, and if you foul, you're kind of betting on the probability that the opponent misses one of the free throw or both of the free throws, then you can have the possibility to go ahead. So these are sort of the things that we're trying to measure and to help coaches make the most educated decisions in these scenarios.
Now the one thing, and again, I'm more of the football like guy, right? But like I know that like the data shows a lot of stuff. Like if you punt on fourth down anywhere where it's like 4-3, you
Mm,
essentially you're saying I'm going to lose. You kick field goals when you're within the 10-yard line. If it's like fourth and goal, and you kick a field goal, you're kind of just trying to stop the bleed and not lose as badly. Because the data shows like go for it on fourth down. Punting's kind of dumb when you're at a certain location, but most coaches and most kind of players and stuff like that, it's just so ingrained that you do this, and it's sort of the safe thing. How do you explain that? How do you bring the insights to a coach who's, I mean, again, at the end of the day, right, their job's on the line because their KPI for them is straight up a record, right? At the end of the day, it's did we win? Are we good? So how do you bring those types of insights, and how do you convince them to act upon those insights? That seems to be one of the hardest parts about this entire kind of being in the data field, is like people don't want to believe numbers a lot of times.
right, right. Yeah, it's not because numbers can be counterintuitive sometimes. And as example you said for the fourth down, punting or going for field goal, I think there is a trend for more teams going for it at fourth down, and that I believe is a result of football analytics. And honestly, back to a question, I think it really depends on what coaches really think, how like kind of open-minded they are, because they have the final say of it. And for example, if you have a coach who is really traditional and he only kind of believes what he sees, it's honestly it's kind of hard to convince him that, hey, this is what numbers say, and maybe we have a higher probability to score in this way rather than the way you are currently doing. So the best job we can do is to kind of translate our numbers, our findings into their language, whether it's football or basketball language or any other domain knowledge that they have, and do our best job. And another thing I want to kind of point out is I would say for the NBA or for sports league in general, the teams, there is a trend of copycat where you see if there's like one team who's doing like zone defense in the NBA, then other teams will follow up. They will follow up because they saw, oh, hey, that team is doing zone defense and it seems pretty effective, huh? And then they will do it. So to some extent, it's always mutually beneficial to see other teams having more analytics people, so that it's kind of their team is doing analytics stuff, and when their coaches actually implementing them, it helps me to make my job easier to convince my coach to say, hey, that team is doing this stuff and see how effective they are. Maybe we should try the same thing. Plus, on top of all the evidence I've gathered. So, yeah.
No, I mean, honestly, I probably only know this much about football because the head of coach for Florida State football is Mike Norvell again, who came
Mhm.
from Memphis, who had an amazing data team, probably that you guys helped him out, maybe not like you particularly, but same thing. He goes for it on fourth, and there's stuff that like I know the fan base hates it because you're like, well, why we go for it, especially when you get stuffed. And you're like, come on, we know we suck. Why would we do that? But the data tells you, and I mean, if you look at the trends, like it's younger coaches who trust data, and it's fascinating of that type of stuff. So let's transition a little bit because I think a lot of what you're talking about really correlates with the supply chain because it's the same thing. It's data's out there that can really help you and really see insights to your stuff, but a lot of times people are just like don't go for it. So let's talk a little bit how you transitioned from basketball and whatnot over into the data, the supply chain side. I mean, what was your exposure like? Did you have any exposure in college or anything like that with supply chain?
I would say the only exposure I had for supply chain is through my mom, because she worked in a import export company in China. So I know she's dealing with like a lot of shipments, a lot of invoice, but that's kind of how as much as I knew, just hearing the term like invoice and shipment from her. And the and it's kind of a coincidence that I landed in FreightPlus. It's I shout out to Christian Wright, because that I through him I got the opportunity for the job, because Christian was hired at FreightPlus, and he asked me if I'm interested to join him for FreightPlus. That's I'm sure, because at that time, as we all know, it was during a pandemic, and the sports leagues are like hit a pause. And before that, I was kind of in the interview process with a couple different uh, companies in sports industries, but it all got paused. So I'm kind of unemployed. I was unemployed after graduation. So I said, sure, I'll give it a try. I've honestly don't know much about logistics, about supply chain, but sure. And then I talked to Steve Aborn, and basically walked through what my resume and what I'm past experience, and had a great conversation with him, and had a talk with another folks, Jason, who is our CTO consultant, and then Steve told me his decision that he was willing to hire me. So that was how kind of I came on board.
Yeah, I got to get Christian on the show. Like I've been talking to him, you know Christian like better than I do. It's like he wants to take his time, he wants to do that stuff. So essentially, we're Star Warsing this, right? I'm starting with you, and then we got to go back and look at the prequel with Christian eventually. But yeah, what was your off that weird tangent I just took us on? What was your first impression? I mean, when especially I can only speak for myself. When I thought like I'm like supply chain, I'll crush this. I see trucks, I understand this stuff. It can't be that difficult. And then I get in, I'm like, what the hell did I sign myself up for? Because I was doing nonprofit, fire and life safety. I was dealing with engineers doing life safety codes and building safety. I was like, that's as complex as you could possibly get. And then you get here, like, what happened? So what was your first impression like?
Yeah, I remember the first week I talked to you, actually, that kind of introductory call, and you mentioned like how long it took you to get familiar with the industry, and I would say that is very true to me as well. The first couple weeks, I like as you just said, I never thought logistics or supply chain as how complicated that is. Like, I saw trucks on highway, and I think about like shipments, or like these planes that shipping freights, but I never thought about all the stuff that was going on behind the scene. And like before talking to Steve, I never realized that how huge the logistics industry is. It's a multi-billion industry. And so yeah, for the first few weeks after I was on board, just a lot of reading and learning for me to get familiar with the industry, and to get familiar with the terminologies, I would say. What's like price sheet and all these load, what are the differences between like shipment and load and transport? What's the relationship between them? And shout out to Bill, also to Bill Muse. He provided a lot of help for me in the TMS, to kind of help me walk through how he would do things, and what's the relationship between different tables and diagrams. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, I mean it's that's the one of the coolest things I always thought about like Freight Plus, formerly Aborn and Co. Right, was just the people. Like everyone's really because of how much attention we pay to customer service, it sort of trickles down internally too, where it's like people have patience, right? That's kind of the cool thing. No one gets, it's not like, oh, geez, what do you don't understand this? I mean, it's also, we're dealing with an industry that's insane. I mean, the amount of different words they use to mean the same thing. And you taught, like, English isn't your first language, right? Like, this is like, you're like, oh, this is gonna be even more complex for like a southerner who's like, oh, what the hell are you guys talking about? But yeah, I mean, it was so interesting for me, and it's funny to hear. Like I felt like I was dooming glooming to everyone who kind of came on. I'm like, it's gonna suck for the first month, guys. Don't worry, you're gonna figure it out. It happens pretty quickly. Like that was the same thing Steve told me, but it's funny to hear that you're like, oh yeah, no, you nailed it. Uh, what about what excites you with this stuff? I mean, again, like you came on during the pandemic, right? We all had the toilet papers were empty. Like you couldn't get TP. It was hard to do some stuff. I mean, what what was that like? What was your experience there? And especially kind of once the dots started clicking, what excited you about the supply chain? Given that, I mean, you had this crazy background with basketball, like something that's so much high energy. What excites you about this industry?
Sure. I think pandemic in some way helps just because online shopping or like e-commerce just is booming and we deal with deliveries every day. And I think before joining FreightPlus, I never thought about, how that package came from Amazon to my place. But since after like reading some of the articles that Steve recommended, that I started to think about, wow, what are some of the steps that Amazon needs to take to ship from, you know, from the facility to my place. And I think the work that I've been doing really helps because it really helped me grow my domain knowledge and help me kind of solve the problems of the like out of curiosity. That kind of really excites me because I'm able to apply the knowledge that I'm using on a daily basis from supply chain or logistics and apply it into my like spare time or my daily life. I am more knowledgeable about what goes on in the delivery and about Amazon, how, for example, how they do Prime 2 day like delivery, stuff like that. This kind of I really find it exciting if there's a connection between something that I'm really close to, for example, like delivery and stuff, with the knowledge that I'm learning. So that's I would say the biggest thing that excites me.
Yeah, I think it's cool because you see, like, as cool as basketball and all that stuff is. I'm not here to like say basketball is dumb. It's more that like it's your real life, right? It's stuff that affects you a little bit more. I mean, that was it. Like out of all my jobs, this is the one where you're like, oh man, like I kind of, especially after like during the pandemic, e-commerce, like you said, just came out to like you're like, wow, this really matters because I'm ordering stuff, and you're starting to understand the whole logistics supply chain of all this, and like you have a little more compassion at the end of the day because you're like, oh wow, I can't believe they pulled this off. Like I recently got like a 70-pound kettlebell delivered to my house, and I was like, I felt bad for everyone involved in that. I'm like, this does not seem like the way this should be going. I'm like, the poor person had to lug it up. Like, I don't have a ton of steps, but they had to lug up a 70-pound kettlebell up steps. And I'm like, and like the shipping cost was nothing. I'm like, this is ridiculous knowing how it all works. But let's transition a little bit over into the work you're doing with us, right? So you got this excitement, you got these connections. Talk a little bit about kind of the work you are doing, kind of high level, right? We don't need to get into the weeds of what clients are happening there, but like what type of insights are you providing? Your role is data analyst, right?
Yeah, that's my official title. So kind of my daily responsibility is to maintain the data pipeline that we built because we are using the TMS, but we also want to kind of have as much control over the data as possible. So we built a data pipeline where we would, pull data from TMS and write into our own database. And then from that, we can basically pull whatever data or criteria we want based on the needs from the operations team. So for example, say operations team wants to see a monthly shipment report for a specific client in that with carrier blah blah blah, then we can do it very easily with a click in our database. So I think this really facilitates the conversation for like our ops team with their clients because we can help them customize the kind of reports they want to see. But also I think just in general having more control over what data you possess is definitely helpful. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of it.
What about the difference between because in the supply chain it's a living data, right? It's constantly like 24/7 being interacted with. How do you find that? What's the difference between that and basketball? Because basketball is like kind of practicing games are the times that you're really kind of being able to measure that type of stuff more or less, right? I mean, sure, the wearable technology and like studying heart rates and all that stuff's coming, but I mean, supply chain is 24/7, 365 stuff is moving. What's that like? What's the difference there? It seems more complex somehow to me, the layman dummy.
Um, as you kind of mentioned before, like whether you play basketball, whether you're like in what industry you are in, everyone deals with logistics. Everyone deals with delivering in to some extent. So I would say one thing is definitely the data volume is different with basketball, because I mean basketball, like I'm not saying basketball data set is small, anything like that, but logistics like data sets is huge, and as you said, it updates kind of like constantly. So that's kind of a challenge that I have faced, or we have faced, that to keep the data sets or the database we have to up to date, to because one thing that kind of say occurring, like keeps occurring conversation between us and operations is the data discrepancy, that they're saying, hey, we're missing like 3 shipments based on the report you said. So we need to look into that. And oftentimes it's just we're not pulling the most up to date data from TMS. So I think the frequency that we need to update and the volume of data is definitely different from, say, the basketball analytics.
Yeah, it's got to be interesting. I mean, especially just like you feel like, oh man, like basketball, it's like this huge kind of like money maker, that type of stuff. But you're like, oh my gosh, like the volume alone is going to be like, wait, what? Like this is so much stuff that we're working with. And then at the end of the day, right? Basketball has rules. Logistics doesn't, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you're like, I gotta get here. Like there's physical, I gotta drive a speed limit, but like you're dealing with human complexities that are so complicated. It's gotta be, as a data science kind of not nerd or anything, but like you gotta kind of be, you gotta be a different breed to be excited for this. You gotta be like, okay, yeah, no, I'm gonna deal with people. But I mean, honestly, the cool thing is like you are more of a people person. You like being out there, so it kind of works because you got to understand how people interact, because I mean that's data, right? It's not just like how fast was the truck going, how much did the pallet weigh, what the dimensions were. There's more to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that excites me is to help solve problems for our company or for like our business teams. Then whenever they have need, I I take pride in helping fund their conversation with their clients using data to help them get more insights, whether they're talking to their clients or carriers. And that's also another thing that I'm really interested in, and I'm really proud of.
What about insights? I mean, you talk about how difficult it can be sometimes to get to speak the language of a basketball coach. What's the where is it harder when it comes to business? Because at the end of the day, it's not like these people's KPIs aren't win and loss. Like, how does it work?
Yeah, I think domain knowledge definitely is super important. That's for basketball, you need to somewhat speak basketball language. You need to understand what a steal or what a turnover is. And for logistics, like as I need to understand what shipment or what a lane is or what a load is, what's the relationship between them. So for me, it's again, I'm still learning it. I'm still learning like the different terminologies that the operations team use on a daily basis. Like say they're looking for a lane report, and I might not know what a lane report means. So Steve would explain it to me. He would break it down for me. Like I want to see a column that with a column with lane, a column with carrier, a column with address and cost and stuff like that. So I think the challenge is again getting the domain knowledge, getting familiar with what the operations team actually looks for, and I'm trying to do my best to speak their language so that there are as fewer discrepancies between what they mean and what I provide to them. So that's something that I'm striving for now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating because a lot of people think like, oh, it's the data is this very linear thing, and I've said it a couple of times, so people are probably annoyed at me at this point. But it's the same thing with like when I do video creation. A lot of times, like someone comes to me with an idea, and it's a lot of like making sure you're communicating it, making sure you're drawing it out. A lot of creative not only goes in what I do, but kind of what you do as well, and it seems very interesting. Rapid fire, quick answer. What's the main difference between basketball analytics and supply chain analytics?
Um, how I would say how important to the world, kind of how important to everyone, because again, everyone deals with supply chain, and if there's error in the supply chain, that will affect much more people than if there's an error, say in basketball, like box score. So that's something that I I feel responsible for. So I try to make like data sets or our database 100% correct.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like again, I came from a nonprofit. You would think like, oh, I came from the whole passionate thing, but I feel like what we're doing here is one thing that you're like, oh man, it really does affect everyone. And it's
Mhm.
so interesting. Frank, man, I could not thank you enough. It's so much fun having you on board, and the whole. Yeah, I mean, you moved from Houston. We didn't even get into any of that stuff. There's so much more about the supply chain that we could really talk to. I mean, what do you think's in store for your future? Kind of, are you digging this? I know you went into data science because you're like, I could possibly be a GM for MBA. What are you thinking about all this?
Sure. I think this job definitely excites me, and seems that we're gonna have a prosperous year. So just keep building on what we have built and trying to do more stuff like visualization, just to provide as much support as we can for FreightPlus, and just help make everyone's life better and easier.
Absolutely. I mean, the best thing is, it turns out logistics is apocalypse proof. So we're good right now. That's the best part about all this.
Yeah.
Frank, man, you're a putter ball sniper. You're a badass data analyst guy. You're all around awesome guy to have on staff. And we just love having you with us at Freight Plus. I mean, Supply Chain 30 is all about kind of what people growing up. And I can guarantee you have been the most unique person we've had on this show. So I cannot thank you enough for joining me today.
Yeah, appreciate your kind words, Kyle. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Let people know how they can get in contact with you. LinkedIn's probably the best location, right?
Sure. Yeah, LinkedIn. If you search Frank Lee Li, that's my last name, and also my Twitter. That's also a good place. My Twitter handle is HZ Blacksmith, and I can explain a little bit about what that means.
Go
So
for it. Yeah.
HZ is kind of the first letter of the city I'm from, Hangzhou in China. HANGZHOU. That's my hometown. So I'm pretty proud of that. And blacksmith is basketball related. Um, so that's something like I make fun of myself, that I tend to miss a lot of shots when I'm like playing basketball. So in English they call it like brick sometimes. And when it hits the rim, it's kind of like blacksmith, hitting the iron. So
So,
I call myself the blacksmith.
oh, okay. So we got a new nickname. We got Nick over at Brokerage who calls himself the Touchdown Factory, which makes zero sense. At least yours actually is being realistic about yourself. So I love it, Frank. We'll call you the Blacksmith from now on. This is awesome. You also are, and we haven't even hit on this, but you got a SoundCloud that people can listen to some of your raps and all that stuff. I mean, there is so much we could be talking about with you, Frank. But maybe we'll put the music. If you let me, I'll play some music at the end of this, just to let people get to hear what Frank sounds like when he's on the beat. But yeah, Frank, thank you so much for your time today, man. I'm so happy to have you on here. I'm so happy you're with us at Freight Plus, and I really can't wait to kind of interact some more. I mean, that's the thing. You've been focused on ops. I haven't even gotten to really use you for my marketing stuff, which is something that like tons of easier insights and also super dumb. So it's nowhere complicated as everything you've dealt with up to here. I'll give you Happy Meal data. Just serve it up. It's super easy.
All right, sounds good to me.
Absolutely. Frank, have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much, Kyle.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
They say the last one's gonna be the best one.
And that's our show. Are you working in the supply chain and under the age of 30 and want to be a guest on our show? Let us know in the comments section or use the messaging app and let's get on. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.
只想再强一点，和我后面大杀四方 look。